If you were born before 1960, stop what you're doing for the next few minutes because what I'm about to walk you through could change the amount that hits your bank account every single month for the rest of your life. Not a little change. For some of you, we're talking hundreds of dollars. And the part that gets me every time I look at this is that most of the people losing that money did everything right. They worked, they paid in, they filed when they were supposed to. They followed the rules as best they understood them. The problem is there's a rule almost nobody explains, buried inside how Social Security calculates your benefit. And it hits people born before 1960 in a very specific way. If the agency used the wrong earnings year, the wrong base, or if your record has a gap you don't know about, your monthly check could be smaller than it's supposed to be. And the system's not going to call you. It's not going to send you a letter. It's going to keep paying you the wrong amount until someone catches it. Today, we're going to catch it together. Let me walk you through exactly how your Social Security benefit gets calculated, where the errors tend to hide, and what you can do right now to find out if you've been shortchanged. This is the kind of thing I built this channel for. Social Security and tax rules shift every single year, and nobody from the government calls to explain what it means for you personally. That's exactly what we're here for. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's start with something most people get wrong about their own Social Security check. Most people think the amount they receive is just some fixed calculation the agency ran once when they applied, locked it in, and that's that. But that's not quite how it works. And the gap between what people assume and what's actually happening is where a lot of money gets lost. Your benefit is based on something called your primary insurance amount, your PIA. And your PIA is calculated from your average indexed monthly earnings, which the agency calls your AIME. Here's what that means in plain English. Social Security looks at your entire work history, pulls out your 35 highest earning years, adjusts those numbers for wage inflation over time, averages them together, and runs them through a formula to produce your monthly benefit. Now, here's where it starts to matter that you were born before 1960. The indexing factor, the number Social Security uses to adjust your old wages for inflation, is tied to the year you turn 60. That's your indexing year. Whatever the national average wage was in the year you turned 60, that's the anchor point for your entire benefit calculation. Every year of earnings before that gets scaled up to that anchor. Every year after it counts at face value. For people born before 1960, that indexing year is 2019 or earlier. Now think about what happened to wages in 2020, 2021, and 2022. They jumped sharply, in part because of pandemic disruptions and what followed. The national average wage index reflected that. And for anyone whose indexing year caught that wave, their benefits got a meaningful boost just from that timing. People born before 1960 mostly didn't catch that wave. Their anchor was set before it. That's not a scandal. It's just how the formula works. But it means if you're in this group, you need to understand your calculation clearly because you're not getting a windfall from the timing, and any error in your underlying record hits you harder. Here's what I mean by that. Let me do the math live so it lands. Say you worked for 38 years. You had a solid career, nothing fancy. Your indexed average monthly earnings come out to around $3,500 a month. Based on the Social Security benefit formula, that might produce a primary insurance amount somewhere around $1,900 to $2,100 a month at full retirement age, depending on your exact record. That's the check you're supposed to get, or something close to it, before any reductions for early claiming. Now, say one of your better earning years has a mistake. Maybe an employer reported your wages incorrectly. Maybe there's a year on your record that shows zero earnings when you actually worked. Maybe a name change, a merger, a small employer who went out of business left a gap. Pull one high earning year out of your 3-5 year average and replace it with a zero, and your AIM drops. Let's say it drops your average by $200 a month. That doesn't sound enormous, but run it through the formula and you might lose $60 to $100 off your monthly benefit. At age 65, with a reasonable life expectancy, that's potentially $15,000 to $20,000 over the course of your retirement that just quietly disappeared. And here's the thing. That mistake could have been sitting in your record for decades. You just never had a reason to look. This is where I want to introduce you to someone. His name is Gerald. He's 68 years old. and he spent most of his working life doing HVAC sheet metal work, mostly in Columbus, Ohio. Good pay for skilled work, physical stuff, the kind of job that wears out your knees before your ambitions. He retired at 66 and started collecting Social Security, $1,780 a month. He figured that sounded about right. He'd never really checked. His daughter, who helps him with his paperwork, convinced him to pull up his My Social Security account online last year. They went through his earnings history together, year by year. And there it was. One year, early in his career, when he'd worked for a small heating company that had since closed, showed up as zero in his record. He remembered that year clearly. He'd worked the whole thing, decent money for the time. Gerald filed a correction request with the Social Security Administration using his old tax records, the W-2 he'd held onto in a shoebox under the bed. The agency corrected the record. His benefit was recalculated. His monthly check went up by $87. And because he'd already been collecting for 2 years at the wrong amount, he also received a retroactive payment to cover what he'd been underpaid. That's what this process can look like in practice. It's not automatic. You have to look, but it's real, and it's yours if the error exists. Now, there's a second place where the calculation goes wrong, and this one is more common than most people realize. It has to do with how Social Security counts your 35 years. The formula always uses your 35 highest earning years. If you worked fewer than 35 years, the agency fills in the missing years with zeros. Those zeros drag your average down. A lot of people know this in a vague way. What they don't know is that some of them could do something about it. If you're still working, even part-time, and you're not yet 70, a good year of earnings now can knock a zero or a low earning year from decades ago out of your 3-5-year average. That's called replacing a zero. And for people born before 1960 who may have had a few short years, a few years off for caregiving, or a gap early in their career, this is something worth understanding before you make decisions about stopping work entirely. I'm not telling you to keep working if your health doesn't allow it or if it doesn't fit your life. I'm saying understand what each additional year of covered earnings does to your calculation, because it might change how you think about part-time work or consulting or any income that still goes through payroll. Let me also talk about something that applies specifically if you're married or if you're a surviving spouse, because this part of the conversation tends to get left out. If you're a widow or widower, you may be entitled to survivor benefits based on your late spouse's record, and those benefits are calculated differently from your own retirement benefit. For survivors, the amount you receive depends on what your spouse was receiving or would have received when they passed. If your spouse had an error in their record, that error flows into your survivor benefit too. I've spoken to women who had no idea their survivor check was calculated on a corrected, or in some cases, an uncorrected version of their husband's record. And because they'd never seen his earnings history, they had no way to know whether it was right or not. If you're in that situation, you can still request an earnings review for a deceased spouse's record in certain circumstances. This is worth asking the Social Security Administration about directly. Call them or go into a local office and ask specifically about reviewing the earnings record for a deceased spouse's benefit calculation. Don't assume it was right. The system doesn't guarantee accuracy. It depends on what was reported, how it was recorded, and whether anyone ever caught a mistake. Now, let's talk about how to actually check your record, because everything I've told you is only useful if you take a next step. The first thing to do is create a My Social Security account if you don't already have one. You can do that at ssa.gov. Once you're in, you can see your complete earnings history year by year going back to the beginning of your work record. You're looking for two things: zeros or gaps in years you know you worked, and unusually low figures in years when you remember earning more. Compare what you see in your record against any old tax documents you have. W-2S, tax returns, old pay stubs, if you've kept them. The further back the potential error, the harder it is to document. But even partial records can sometimes support a correction request. If you find a discrepancy, you can file what's informally called an earnings correction request. The formal process involves submitting documentation to the Social Security Administration and requesting a recalculation. This is something you can do yourself or with help from a benefits counselor, which is a different thing from a financial advisor. Many area agencies on aging have staff or volunteers trained specifically in Social Security issues who can help you navigate this without charging you anything. Now, I want to say this clearly because I think it's important. what I'm walking you through here is educational. It's the general mechanism of how this works for people in your situation. Your specific numbers, your specific record, your specific situation, those deserve a real conversation with someone who can look at your actual case. A benefits counselor, a Social Security representative, or a financial professional who specializes in retirement income can help you figure out whether any of this applies to you and what your next step looks like. Please use what you're learning here as a starting point, not an ending point. That said, the starting point matters. Most people never start. They assume the check is right. They assume somebody would have told them if something was off. And that assumption costs them money for years. There's a third thing I want you to look at, and this is the one that surprises people most when they see it. For anyone born before 1960 who claimed benefits before their full retirement age, your benefit was permanently reduced. You know that. What some people don't fully grasp is how the reduction was calculated and whether that calculation was done correctly. Full retirement age for people born between 1,943 and 1,954 is 66. For those born in 1955, it's 66 and 2 months. For 1,956, 66 and 4 months. And it increases by 2 months for each subsequent birth year until you reach 1960, where it hits 67. This matters because the early claiming reduction is calculated based on the number of months between when you claimed and your actual full retirement age. If your birth date was recorded incorrectly in the system, or if there was any confusion about which full retirement age applied to you specifically, your reduction percentage might be wrong. It could be slightly too large. It could mean your base benefit, the number everything else is built on, is smaller than it should be. This is not a common error, but it happens. And for people right on the boundary of these birth year thresholds, particularly those born in 1954, 1955, or 1956, it's worth a second look. Let's run through a quick example so you can see the stakes. Say your full retirement age is 66 and 2 months because you were born in 1955. You claimed at 63 exactly. That's 38 months early. The reduction formula takes 0.05% for each of the first 36 months and 0.05% for each month beyond 36. So for 36 months, you're at roughly 20% reduction. And for the remaining 2 months, you add about another 0.83%. Your total permanent reduction is roughly 20.83%. Now, if someone calculated that wrong and used 66 and 0 months instead of 66 and 2 months as your full retirement age, your reduction would be calculated as 40 months early instead of 38. That's a slightly larger reduction than you were actually entitled to. Over 20 years of collecting benefits, even a fraction of a percent error adds up to real money. The point isn't to make you paranoid. The point is to make you curious enough to look. These are fixable things, but only if someone finds them. I want to bring Gerald back for a moment because there's a piece of his story I held back. When he called the Social Security Administration to report the zero earnings year, the first representative he reached wasn't sure what to do with his request and transferred him twice. The third person he spoke to knew exactly what he meant, pulled up the process, and got him started. It took Gerald 3 phone calls and about 6 weeks to get the final answer. He almost gave up after the first call. He told me, and I'm paraphrasing because I hear versions of this a lot, that he felt like the system was designed to make you stop trying. I'm not going to argue with that feeling, but I'll tell you what he told me after the process was done. He said the $87 a month felt less like money and more like respect. Like someone finally said, yes, you worked for this, and here it is. That's what this is about. Not just the dollars, though the dollars are real and they matter. It's about making sure the system reflects what you actually earned. Here's what I want you to do this week, not someday, this week. Go to ssa.gov and log into your My Social Security account or create one if you haven't. Pull up your full earnings history. Look at it carefully, year by year. If you see a 0 in a year you worked or a number that seems too low for what you remember earning, write it down. Start gathering any tax records or W-2S you have from that period. And then call the Social Security Administration or go into a local office and start a conversation about a potential earnings record review. If you're a surviving spouse, ask specifically whether you can request a review of your late spouse's earnings record as it relates to your current benefit. If any of this raises questions about your specific numbers, sit down with a benefits counselor or a financial professional who specializes in Social Security. Many libraries, senior centers, and area agencies on aging offer free help with exactly this. You did nothing wrong. The system just doesn't tell you when it gets something wrong either. That's why you have to be the one to look. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments. Have you ever looked at your full Social Security earnings record year by year? And if you have, did you find anything that surprised you? Drop it down below. I read every single one, and I want to know what you're seeing out there. And if you know someone born before 1960 who's already collecting Social Security, do them a favor and share this with them. Send it to your brother, your sister, your neighbor, or your spouse, because the people who need this most are usually the last ones to look for it. That's what this channel is for. Let's keep walking through it together.